is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening.
Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie, all one word. And if you sign up, you do get a weekly bonus episode of just everything I happen to be watching that particular week. And if, let's see, and I want to take a moment to thank our top patrons. They are Chris Balga, Jeff Whitman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you hear today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. I have a familiar voice on the podcast. I have Palmer. Say hi, Palmer.
Hi, Palmer.
Hey.
Hi.
And you are from Academy Rewind, but if people haven't heard you on the podcast before, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. I am Palmer, and as you said, I am from Academy Rewind. And two, uh, I love that movie episodes. One with a fairly common movie, and one with a movie that only two people have now heard of.
That's right. I think the first one we did was it? Oh no, the second one I'm thinking of was it Route 66?
Yes, the second one.
The first one was Bird of Prey, right?
Yep. Yeah, we
Yeah.
did Birds of Prey during the pandemic, and then Interstate 66, almost a year ago. March, April,
Yeah,
May.
I know it's
Yeah,
been a hot
May-ish.
minute.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is good
Well, it's
because
nice to hear from you.
thank you. We've been on Academy Rewind's been on a little bit of a hiatus because someone decided to have a kid. We won't mention any names, but
I feel
so
like I
we've
know
been
who you're talking about.
yeah, so we've been on hiatus. Luckily, we'll be recording. I think next week is when we're recording with you of all people.
Of all people.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
you're essentially the third host of the show at this point.
Happy to return and understandable about the hiatus. I mean, children keep you busy, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, you're up all night feeding the child anyway. You telling me you can't watch a movie in that amount of time?
I'll let Tim answer that. Well, really happy to have you back, and I
Thank you.
always have the guests pick the movie. So, what movie did you choose to talk about today?
Today will be the Ron Howard classic, The Paper.
I've never seen this film before.
Yeah, it's got to be like one of the. It's got to be not the low point of Ron Howard's career, because I do really like this movie, and I think people who watch it do tend to like the movie. But it's definitely
Yeah, I liked it.
it's definitely like the overlooked one.
Yes. But yeah, so you introduced me to a new movie. This was made in 1994. And for those of you listening, if you're still with us, I am not going to do a spoiler-free and spoiler-filled review. We just kind of chat about the movie. So I'm going to give a quick synopsis, and you may want to pause here and go watch the movie and come back. I did rent it on iTunes for $3.99, so you can find it on there. Here's the synopsis of the film. Henry Hackett is an editor at the New York Sun, a tabloid paper facing financial cuts. His pregnant wife pleads with him to get a more respectable job so he can spend more time with his family. Hackett is considering an offer from another paper with fewer hours and higher pay when he gets the hottest story in years. When this scoop leads to a burst of violence and a conflict with his new boss, Alicia, he faces a startling moment of truth.
Yes, that he's Batman.
Yes, he realizes he's Batman. I'm sure that's going to come up a little bit when we talk about the quick facts too.
Yeah,
about.
I noticed the bat signal shows up a couple times.
Oh, really? Okay, I think I missed that, so you'll have to point that out to me. But when did you first see this movie?
This movie probably when it first came out. I definitely didn't see it in the theaters, but 1994, I would have been. Oh, you know what it was? It was always on. It was always on like HBO or
Oh,
Showtime
okay.
around,
Yeah.
when it came to the cable networks. So we had those channels when I was growing up, and this is one like I would always watch when it was on, even though at the time I was like, let's see, 94, so I was 13. Um, but it always just fascinated me.
Yeah, it's good. I like I said, I hadn't seen it before, but I have a couple of quick facts I wanted to share about it that kind of I thought were interesting. The film takes place in a 24-hour span. The events of the film follows different characters and their experiences throughout the day. The film was produced by Brian Grazer, who also produced the hit show 24, which also follows a different character over a 24-hour period.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. That was what stood out to me a little bit when reading about the movie, was that it takes place in 24 hours.
It really does, and it's such a condensed 24 hours. It's not like, by the time everything starts getting to go in the story, they kind of give you an update on the time here and there, and there's like a really big time jump from like the say 10 a.m. when he gets in to like the 2 p.m. block. So really
Mhm.
most of the stuff happens between like his like say 3 p.m. to like say midnight ish.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
yeah. So there are there are times where they're just like they're talking and you're like, oh, not much time has passed in this day. They still have an entire day, and they're like, you need to get this in the next 2 hours. And I'm like, what? Where the hell? When did we go from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. already?
Yeah. Also, the co-screenwriter Stephen Cope has experience in the world of journalism because he's the editor-in-chief for Time magazine.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. One other fact I had is that Mike Sheehan was the key detective in the Central Park case in 1989, but has a stance that he still thinks the Central Park Five were the perpetrators, which is crazy. And opposite of what the character he's playing in this movie. Like, I couldn't help but feel watching this movie that it reminded me of that case, so that must be why they picked him. But
It kind of does.
anyway,
Yeah. Uh,
yeah.
I wonder if the irony was lost on him at all. Like that's what his
Yeah.
character was in this movie, and especially in the time frame of this movie. Like the Central Park Five, I believe they're still in jail at this point, right?
It says 1989, so probably. And yeah, conviction in 2002. It was overturned. So yeah, they would have still
Yeah.
been
So
in
they,
jail.
yeah. So and it was, certainly it was always controversial. So, but I do
Oh, for
wonder.
sure.
I
But
wonder if the
yeah, it's
years have
like
gone on, if maybe his stance has changed.
you got to wonder too, just, not sure and just speculating here, but if he was a detective and he was the key detective, maybe he doesn't want to let go of the past because it makes him look bad,
Right.
and,
Sometimes
sort of protecting himself and
yeah.
his other
Sometimes they're a little
detectives.
bit too close, and even though he's completely wrong, maybe he for some reason still thinks the information that he had was correct at the time.
Yeah, who knows?
Like
But
I'm
that
not
was shocking to me. Like, if I were him, and he really thinks that, it's strange that he would even be in this movie then. Because it
right.
seems like that movie is specifically kind of talking about how different headlines can, can really affect people if you print the wrong one. And that, I feel like the whole point of the movie is you shouldn't be quick to print something just to get ahead of the fact, until you have all the information.
Yeah, and that I always liked the storyline of this movie growing up, where you have this one guy kind of fighting for the truth of the story, and not
Mhm.
just like, well, it's fine, we'll tell the truth tomorrow, but today we have to get out of paper, so we're just going to go with this today. Like, that's one of the lines is, we only have to be right for a day. And as you as I've grown up and become more worldly, like nowadays, it's even more like pressing to see in a movie.
Oh yeah, I feel like it's more relevant than it's ever been. I
Yeah.
mean, the famous case that it's sort of, I mean, almost based on, was definitely something where people's lives were affected. I remember Trump took out like that entire first page or whatever of a newspaper to label some people as convicted, and they weren't.
Right.
And I feel like in modern times, we're just dealing with that more and more and more, where, you know, uh, you need to be careful about the sources that you rely on, because so many different sources rely on getting the information out there as fast as they can instead of the correct information. And I think we've seen a lot recently where, they accidentally misidentify someone and like ruin their lives, or, people get death
Yeah.
threats and things like that. I mean, they really have a responsibility not to just report something as fast as you can, but rather as
Yeah.
accurately as you can.
Especially nowadays, where it's an instant thing. Like, newspapers are going on Twitter to kind of announce stuff, rather
Hmm.
than spending the day cultivating a paper, even making an article on a website, even just like 10-15 years ago, where stuff
Yeah.
started going digital. Like, it still took time for them to put it up on a website, where now Twitter is giving them the chance to broadcast it almost immediately.
Yeah, and we're all sort of getting kind of desensitized, because we'll get on Twitter and we're like, it'll say like, so and so is dead, and then a minute later, like, oh, never mind, that was misreported, and you're like, huh, it's like we're not really getting great, accurate information anymore, just by the nature of how fast it's being put out there.
Yeah.
Well, always good to start off a podcast with a very controversial, heated things to talk about. But I mean, that is what this movie's about. But let's move on a little bit to the director. So you mentioned at the top that this is from Ron Howard's career, but it's not. You said not really one of the biggest movies he's known for.
I honestly don't think so. Like,
Yeah.
if for one, I think it's hard finding people that might have seen this movie, and then if they have, they might not remember that it's Ron Howard.
Yeah,
And
I was kind of surprised by that.
yeah, and it's weird, because like the same thing happens to me sometimes. Even with movies that I like
Oh yeah.
Far and Away, another Ron Howard movie, is
Oh man,
another.
I haven't seen that in years. I remember seeing that though.
That's another one where it's like, I'll watch it and I'm like, oh, that's right, Ron Howard directed this. Or, you get something like Spielberg directing something out of the blue. Like, say, what was it, Tintin? Was that the one that he did?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are times where like directors will have stuff that doesn't seem that people don't collectively remember to be their movies.
Yeah, it's not like something that I think of as his film, like you said.
Yeah.
When I think of him, I think of like A Beautiful Mind or The Da Vinci Code, or, things like that.
Yeah.
Apollo 13, but which was actually a year after The Paper came out.
Oh man, and that was and he won an award. He won the director award for that, right? Man, just
That sounds right.
1 year before he should have won it for The Paper. I don't remember
Yeah.
anything else about 1994, but I'm just going to assume he should have won it for The Paper.
Yeah, I think in 1994 I was probably 9 or 10, so I don't remember much then either. Um, let's talk a little bit about the cast then.
And what a cast, really.
It's a huge cast, yeah.
Yeah. Like, you can tell it's definitely a name director because of the
Hmm.
cast that they pulled in for this relatively small movie.
Right. So it stars Michael Keaton, of course,
Mhm.
and but he's joined by Robert Duvall, Glenn Close, Marissa Tomei, Randy Quaid, Jason Alexander,
Yeah, he
Catherine
shows up.
O'Hara. So many people.
The chief who captured Carmen Sandiego, on PBS. I can never remember her first name, but like her last name is Thigpen. But she plays the secretary to Michael Keaton. You have
I
Spalding
did not
Gray.
notice that.
Yep. You have Spalding Gray, who was, a person in the literary world
Mhm.
who's unfortunately since passed away. That's the only I only knew him from this movie.
Oh, okay.
I think that might be all the biggest names. Obviously, you have Clint Howard and Rance Howard.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, and then there's some character actors that you'll notice from other movies, like the owner of the paper played the grandfather in Little Big League.
Oh, okay.
He also played the editor in All the President's Men, but we all know him from Little Big League, is essentially.
Right. Yeah, I was surprised by how much of the cast that I recognized, and obviously were very big in '94. And yeah, I was like, how did I miss this one? But I love how you said earlier that you saw this like over and over again on like HBO. There's so many movies like that where you miss them in theaters, and then like a network gets like the rights to them and plays them over and over, and then they end up sort of becoming a favorite of yours that way instead. I always think that's interesting when someone has that history with a movie.
Yeah, this was one of the few movies at the time, like every time I passed by it, I would just stop and watch it. So it's definitely one of the movies that I've seen the most, even though I could never tell you like what movies that actually equates to. But yeah, it was, even for being young, like it always surprised me that I was that interested in this movie.
Yeah, it's listed. I noticed the tagline says a new comedy from the director of Backdraft and Parenthood. I didn't
Yep.
really think of it as necessarily, I mean, there's comedic moments, but it wasn't like a straight comedy to me. The comedy drama, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a good chunk of comedy, so I can
Hmm.
see. I don't know if I would completely. I don't know if my first instinct in marketing would be like, let's push this as a comedy.
Yeah, like there's some serious stuff that happens. Also, the other tagline says a behind the lines look at work, marriage, and other forms of combat.
Okay,
Interesting.
they, whoever was doing marketing at the time
I know who
was
did they
was
watch
not.
this movie?
Yeah, I don't think it was their best. It wasn't their best, unfortunately. Uh, Geez, yeah. I don't. This is before. This is even before we all found out like Randy Quaid was really crazy. Like
Hmm.
like
This is true.
his character in this movie not too far from his real life apparently.
Ugh. Um, do you want to talk about some of your favorite scenes from the movie?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And funny enough, they do they do involve Randy Quaid. Like I always loved his character growing up. He's a columnist who we find out at the beginning of the movie had his car towed and they damaged his car. So naturally, as a columnist for a newspaper, he decides to go on a rant about the parking in the city, and he really goes after one like bureaucrat. Like I don't even think it's the head of parking. I think it's just the one person that he was able to find out the name of. And so we meet him because he's sleeping inside Michael Keaton's office because he's afraid to go home that this person is trying to kill him. And there's an interaction between him and Michael Keaton, which is still my favorite line from the movie, where Keaton notices like he just has a random gun on him, and he's like, "Why do you have a gun?" He's like, "Oh, I told you that they're after me." He's like, "When did you start getting so paranoid?" And he just looks at him deadpan, is like, "When they started plotting against me."
Yeah, I guess there is kind of a lot of humor in the movie.
Mostly from Randy Quaid.
Yeah.
But even like Robert Duvall has his own like folksy, his folksy Robert Duvall comedy charm.
Hmm.
Him at the doctor's finding out his news,
Yes.
and like his sign of gallows humor, if you will.
Hmm.
I think it tries to lighten a very serious part of the movie, and it's not really one that's one storyline. Like, I'm not too sure why it was included.
I was actually going to ask that. Like, what is it about his boss, right? Having this illness. I guess it's just supposed to add weight to time is running out or realizing that where
Yeah,
priorities need to align or something like that.
maybe because like we kind of like Michael Keaton is so busy trying to chase the story that he isn't necessarily losing his marriage, but his very pregnant wife, who was a reporter at the paper, who's on maternity leave. She's 8.5 months pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
who right now has really, nothing to do but sit there and kind of say, kind of look at, the kind of life he's leading and say, if something happens, will he be there?
Mm-hmm.
And then we see Robert Duvall, who you could argue did all the same stuff that you see Michael Keaton doing and didn't pay enough attention to his family. And now his daughter's kind of estranged from him, although we do see him try and patch things up with his daughter, and now he's kind of in this spot where something might be coming down the pipeline for him, and he doesn't really have anybody there. So you could say that it's
Right.
it's it's a good, like, Christmas of yet to come, the spirit of Christmas of yet to come that Michael Keaton can see and be like, I don't want to end up completely like that.
Yeah, because it seems like Robert Duvall's character really placed the job above, like you're saying, his family, his own health, and now he's in like a really bad position.
Yeah.
Whereas Michael Keaton's character, like you said, he's becoming sort of like a workaholic that the story is more important than anything else, including his family. Although I would argue Marissa Tomei's character also kind of, I mean, she can't get away from the story either, so.
Right. And I think we note, like, even like at the end of this movie, she makes a comment about how all like the arguments they had the previous day, how she doesn't remember them at all,
Oh
and it
yeah.
and it doesn't
Yeah.
really matter. So I think she even realizes, like, it was a little bit overblown to an
Hmm.
extent. And I'm not saying he wasn't a workaholic, but I am saying, like, for this story that they're working on, that will essentially impact greatly two innocent people of color's lives, to the
Hmm.
point where it could utterly ruin it. I would argue, like, this story was not the best story to kind of make the argument that he was choosing work over other people.
Yeah, it's like that was a really important story. I mean, I guess she was trying to say like there's always going to be something like that. But at the
Right.
same time, she couldn't help getting involved because it was, complicated. It involved organized crime and
Yeah.
I mean, they
Like,
both are deeply dedicated journalists. Like I think there's a point where Robert Duvall makes a comment like we don't do it for the paycheck kind of thing because it's
yeah.
not significant. It's the truth that matters.
Right. And you're right, because she goes off 8.5 months pregnant, chasing a lead, even though even
With that
Michael Keaton was
creepy
like,
dude.
yeah,
That guy's like, "Do I have a chance?" I'm like, "She's pregnant, sir."
she's pregnant,
Like, are you
she's
serious?
married, and yeah, like, that was one of those. I'm like, yeah, no, not the best time to shoot your shot, man.
Yeah, he was like, "Where do I stand?" I'm like, "I don't know how she could have made it any more clear where you stand." That's really funny, but she had to use her source. I get it.
Right.
Um, yeah.
You got Glenn Close in this, who does a really good job at playing a very uptight person that you kind of dislike throughout most of the movie, because she has to play the bad person. Like, she has to play the bean counter that
Yeah.
that is trying to keep a budget. And you understand, like, I can understand that to a point, and she does let personal grudges kind of dictate some of this, as does Michael Keaton in some respect. But like, most of the time I come back to the story that they're chasing, and I'm like, this isn't the story to have all of this to have all of these arguments about.
Yeah. So I guess we should say what the story is too, because we haven't talked about that yet. But basically, there's a murder and some graffiti on a car, and these two young black teens see it. They're like, "Oh, what's going on over here?" Or, what's happening over here? And then they realize someone's dead. And one of the teenagers even almost touches the gun, and his friend is like, "No," which, like, this is my first time watching it. I'm like, "No, don't." And then somebody takes a picture of them, and so this leads to, like, later people thinking it's these teens and running with that story versus, investigating it.
Right.
They're just the easiest, most convenient people that were right there. And that's where I was talking about. It reminds me of that case, which again makes me surprised someone would be in this movie if they disagreed with the outcome of the overturn. But I guess this movie came out before that was overturned. So
right.
Who knows?
So
yeah,
and
interesting.
Yeah,
parallel.
and like you're right. Like the cops, when they're talking to the cop, even the cop's like, look, these kids were just walking by. Like, we have no evidence whatsoever that they were involved. There's no print on any of the murder weapon. Their prints are nowhere on the site itself. So, like, even the cops are just like, this is a complete BS thing. And you're right. Like, it's a very poignant story, especially at that time. That you can see, like, why Michael Keaton is fighting to make sure they don't just print the facts as they have them, that they print the truth.
Right. But, it shows the pressure in the movie of different outlets trying to be the first to release information about a story.
Yeah. I would wonder what this movie would look like made today.
Mm-hmm.
And you would, like, I almost think like you would give it to Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah, I was gonna say it kind of reminds me of, like, I can't remember the title now, The Trial of the Chicago 7 or
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it does kind of remind you of that. And it definitely has like an All the President's Men type of feel, because it's about, it has, it's the journalistic integrity of it all. So you have that, but it's very frantic and kinetic. Most of the action, most of the scenes are fast paced with multiple conversations going on. But there's at one point, like, you see him juggling like 3 calls on hold, bouncing back and forth between a reporter, his wife, and then the guy from the other uptown paper that found out he had stole the lead off of his desk during an interview.
Yeah.
So you have all that going on, and for the time frame, this movie does kind of look like very 90s, though.
It does. I mean, the fashion, even some of the tropes, I feel like Glenn Close's character would be a little different, because I feel like she's sort of playing into this, like, in the 80s and 90s, there was always like these tough women in, like, positions of power that were, like, awful. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. I feel like the 80s and 90s didn't know how to handle that topic very well, and so the characters come off kind of cartoonishly bad, where she, like, tries to sleep with her boss and, like, do anything to, like, get the story. You're like, now you're kind of like, well, I don't know about that part.
Yeah, like,
would have that these days.
Like, it seemed to be like in the 80s and 90s, the only way they could write women in any sort of power was like they had to be like tough and very cold.
Yeah, which is, like, not like real life, like,
Right.
But I mean, it was newer at the time, I guess, and so that's why. But I mean, and she is kind of a bad person, because she's, like, cares so much about her reputation and being in a position of power that she doesn't care about the truth anymore. And, like, there's that scene where they're like, "You've become everything you hate,"
Right, which is why I'm glad, like, she kind of has the redemption of it, to make sure the paper puts out the right thing, because you could. They don't really give you much to argue this point. There is a scene in which Randy Quaid, where she's talking to Randy Quaid, and she's talking about how like everyone hates her and this and that, and Randy Quaid's like, look, like the job you're in is the job that nobody wants, because you're the one who has
Yeah.
to say no, and yeah, everyone's gonna hate you, and if you wanted to be liked, you shouldn't have taken the job that you did. And like he feels a little sort of empathy for her, but I also think, unfortunately, given the time frame, like she thinks she has to be like this to justify
Yeah.
her position.
I think that's true, and I think that's something that's evolved.
Thankfully, yeah.
Her speech there, I felt like had two different levels to it. On the one hand, it's like there is sort of an issue in the workplace, or at least there used to be, of like not inviting certain people to the happy hours everyone's going to, leaving people out of the room when decisions are made. And she was touching on that. But like you said, Randy Quaid's character kind of counteracts that with, well, it's also literally the position you pick, though, not
Yeah,
even just that you're a woman in a position of power, but on top of that, you're in a really unliked position of power, like you said, the bean counter.
right. This movie might also have the distinguish of the worst dad joke in history,
Which one was that?
where they're in the bar and she's going to call the paper, and she accidentally gets shot during a commotion,
Oh
and
yeah.
they rush over to her and she's like, there's a bullet in my leg. Why did the bullet go through the wall? And Randy Quaid just sits there. He's like, to get to the other side.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that scene. That was intense. With Jason Alexander. Can you kind of like set that up and talk
Yep.
about what was
So
happening?
so Robert Duvall goes to this local bar to bend the bartender's ear about how his daughter hates him and how he wants to make up with her. And we
Hmm.
see Jason Alexander there, who is unnamed at the time, and the bartender, he asks who that guy is because he keeps seeing him look over, and the bartender's like, oh, he says he's waiting for a fight. Gradually throughout the rest of the movie, Jason Alexander starts talking to Robert Duvall, and we find out that he's the parking commissioner, or the person that
Ah.
Randy Quaid has been writing the articles about.
Ugh.
So Randy Quaid and Glenn Close come into the bar later, after a blow up with Michael Keaton's character,
Hmm.
and once Jason Alexander sees him, Jason Alexander pulls a gun on him because because of the articles that were written and him being named. Now, like, the public kind of knows where he lives, or is kind of hounding him and hounding his kids at school.
It
You know,
like led to a divorce, right, with his wife, I think, or
yeah. So
yeah.
there's a lot going on as a fallout from these articles, which again is very timely with everything that kind of happens nowadays. Like
Hmm.
this got way ahead of way ahead of Twitter,
That's
and
true. Like, cause,
and
'cause the motive of like of of spotlighting this guy for Randy Quaid's character, it's overly personal, right? Like he's writing like mean stuff about Alexander's character, but
right.
it's because he's getting like parking tickets and stuff. And I mean, everyone hates that. And like that's a huge thing that happens in every downtown city. It's always a problem, but the problem is Randy Quaid targeted Jason Jason's character Sandusky, and so
Yeah.
now like he's made him like this public figure that everyone hates, where
And,
normally he wouldn't
and
be.
right, and he does it multiple times. It's not just like one article.
Yeah.
And like, Sandusky even asks him, he's like, why did it have to be me? And all Randy Quaid's like counterpoints are, well, you're a public official, it was your turn, or just like, you didn't pick up the phone, you didn't pay the damage because like his car got damaged, and that was like his real crux of it. And he's like, you should have just paid for the damage to the car. Like, and I'm like, in the grand scheme of things, like with what this guy seems to be going through because of these articles, that's not a good enough reason.
Yeah, it seems like he abused his power there. I mean, he didn't have to write all those articles and make everyone hate him so much and make his wife leave him and his kids be threatened
Right.
at school over
Yeah.
parking tickets. Like, that's not that serious.
And we kind of see it, we see it in some of like the transitional scenes. Like there's a scene in which either Michael Keaton or Glenn Close are coming into the building, and we see like people jumping onto the hood of a car that's getting towed for being in an illegal parking spot or whatever, and they're like, "You tell Sandusky we're not going to take this anymore."
Oh,
and I'm
yeah.
like, what the hell is going on?
About that.
And then she even shows up with like a security guard or a tow truck driver that has like some spots on his face, like he got beat up. And I'm like, what the hell? Like,
yeah, that's too far over.
Yeah, like
it just, like you said, it's like showing how like the news source can craft their own narrative and really sway people in a way that maybe they shouldn't be, or could have unintended consequences. And like you said, pretty timely for these days.
Yeah, and I think it kind of it goes back into the Michael Keaton thing nicely, because it's kind of showing like, yeah, Randy Quaid is saying factual stuff, but is that stuff to the point where it ruins this guy's life?
Yeah.
And was it necessary?
Yeah, so, I would argue no.
No, definitely not. So the theme of this movie is very strong in, be careful how you report something, think about the lives that it impacts, and don't just go with the facts you have. Try to make sure that the facts are the truth.
Yeah. Don't just take things at face value. Like there's always some more to be investigated, and it takes time, like you said. Speaking of that, since we talked about this scene, should we talk also about the scene you were referencing just now with Michael Keaton? There's a big confrontation between him and Glenn Close.
Yep. So they finally find out what Michael Keaton's kind of been chasing all along. They get to the paper, but at this point it's 10 o'clock at night. Now, anyone that knows a little bit about newspapers, that like it takes a while to print all these papers. Like this is back in '94, where they still kind of had really good circulation. Like I forgot when I was looking it up online that like circulation at around this time could have been like 1 million-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So they start running presses, from what I can gather in this movie for this paper, at say around 7 o'clock.
Okay.
So, but in order to comment on the teens getting arrested, because it all kind of kicks off with the fact that this murder happened overnight, and they were the only ones in town that didn't report the murder.
Mm-hmm.
So now they have a backup to go with a subway derailment, but they really want to go with the arrest, because at least there'll be, it's the topic going on. So they're gonna walk the two defendants at 7:30. So they already have to make concession that they're gonna start the print run late, which means it costs them like $12,000, because the truck drivers that drive the papers are all union. So for them to be standing around, you're paying them regardless. Like it doesn't matter if you pushed it back. So at this point, it's like 10 o'clock at night. He's got his quote that he needed. He intentionally kind of sent a unseasoned photographer to hope that she doesn't get a picture so they could use for the wrong headline.
Mm-hmm.
He gets back. They ran the wrong headline, and he decides he's stopping the press. And
which is literally like a button.
Yep, which is just a button. You need a key and a button. But Randy Quaid makes him yell it, because you have to yell it.
Mm-hmm.
Glenn Close finds out, because she's the one who told them to run the wrong headline.
Yeah.
They have a fight downstairs because they're not friends. Like they've been at each other throughout most of this movie, and pretty much from what we can gather, they're at odds most of the time. So now their personal feelings with each other are kind of coming to this bubbling point too.
Yeah.
all over this story. So they have a nice, long, dragged out fight.
I mean, literally like punching each other. Like
Yep.
he's not afraid to hit Glenn Close, a woman. Notice that. Oh, Marissa Tomei hates her too, right? Like they in the beginning they're talking about like how much they don't like her.
Right. And
Yeah.
again, because of the position she's in, like, yeah.
Yes.
I will say, though, he doesn't throw the first punch.
That's true. I mean, that would be. I feel like we would turn on him if he did
Right.
that. We'd be like, "Whoa, whoa, sir!"
Right.
But
Like
yeah, she does. She's the one that gets physical.
Yeah. Like he does kind of push her off to the side. So that is, that is no bueno to kind of start it off because she's trying to get in his way of stopping the press. But then, yeah, they have a scuffle, and he stops the press. She starts it back up. She fires him. So, and that's when he tells her, you officially became everything you hated.
Yeah.
And that kind of starts her turning point of self-reflection of, do I really need to be the way I am to get the job that I need to done?
Yeah, like she was putting dollar signs ahead of people's lives.
Right.
It's like she's going to ruin two people's lives. Yes, you will lose money having to reprint the headline, but ultimately that shouldn't be her focus. Even if it's her job in air quotes, it's still she has a moral obligation not to follow that.
Right. And like some of it's petty, like we see at the beginning where she's talking about a phone bill and Michael Keaton's like, "Oh, I'm not going to ask reporters to wait till 5 o'clock to make an out-of-state phone call just to save a few
Right.
pennies." That's nothing compared to knowingly running a story that's wrong.
Right. Like she acted like that was so serious, but what she's doing is really more egregious in general. Like even if they make phone calls at specific times, it's not really going to save a significant amount anyway.
Right. And that, Randy Quaid actually has to like spell that out for her. He's like, and even like Randy Quaid kind of takes some sort of repentance for what he does. He's like, look, I blow things way out of proportion.
They are working at a tabloid.
Right. Well, a tabloid's really like a misnomer here because it's the size of the paper that makes it a tabloid, which I didn't realize. But they do actual news.
Yeah,
and they do a lot
maybe
of
just back when there was more news in general, there were different sizes and they meant something. Now tabloid just means
now you get like tabloid is TMZ. Yeah. So so he's like, I blow things out of proportion, or we run stories because we have a funny headline for it, or we have a picture of a dismembered arm, which is comes up more often in this movie than I would imagine. but he's like, but until tonight, we never knowingly got a story wrong and printed it. And that's what kind of, that's Glenn Close's like come to Jesus moment where she's like, all right, yeah, like this, like that's kind of where you should draw the line with money. Like,
right. Yeah, completely agree. So what are some other scenes that we haven't chatted about yet?
There's another scene in which Marissa Tomei comes to check on Michael Keaton after his interview because she's pushing him to get she's pushing him for this interview, and she's like, I want to know everything about it. And as she comes into the office, it's right around their time for their 3 o'clock meeting, which I guess is when they start like really setting what the paper is going to be. So there's two reporters kind of arguing about the lead on the story, because the reason they got beat overnight was because this guy didn't answer his beeper, and that was his section, like that was his territory. So Michael Keaton sends out another woman into his territory, so he's upset. she's kind of arguing with him about it. All these people are kind of rushing into his office while Marissa Tomei, who's just like sitting there trying to talk to her husband about a really big life decision, and Randy Quaid's just like, can somebody please let her talk to her husband? And we just finally see him like walk out calmly of the office. He grabs like two bundles of papers, stacks them in the office, and fires a gun into the paper.
Oh yeah.
Just, and they all stop, and he's like, let her talk to her husband, please.
There's a lot of tense, action-packed moments in this movie.
Yeah, there really is. And then like 2 minutes later, you have a security guard kind of walking up, it's after like their afternoon thing, and he's like, "Hey, did anybody hear a gunshot?"
Oh yeah, it's very casually asked about.
Yeah,
for the
and
rest of the movie.
Michael Keaton sends him over to Glenn Close's office.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah. I have the movie on as we're talking, and it just got to the scene in which Marissa Tomei is talking to her source, and it's not. But when I was rewatching this, I immediately thought he was Clark Gregg, because he's got the same kind of face and receding hairline.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a character actor whose name I couldn't remember for the life of me. But you would recognize him if you saw him. But it's, again, like I just saw him like mouth, where, just like to know where I stood. She's like, you kind of knew that when I called.
Oh well, she got her source.
Yep, which is really all that matters.
Yes, I thought I guess kind of a birthing scene. She has a medical emergency and has to be like rushed to the hospital.
Yep.
I thought that was yeah.
Yeah, I do like prior to that, because she's typing out thank you cards for people that, for a baby shower or whatever, and she's like, thank you for the spotted thing that 3 other people bought. What was it, on sale? And she's not really typing that, she's just kind of narrating it. But yeah, she goes into a medical emergency, which is probably why they commit pregnant women to bed rest, because she does a lot of running around in this movie and is very stressed out.
I know, she's doing the most, man. But yeah. I think it's sort of implying that she doesn't really want a future of just staying at home taking care of her kids. I feel like she's learning that in this movie. She's like, wait a minute, I do not want to give this up. It's awesome.
She definitely doesn't. Like, she goes out to dinner with Catherine Keener, or she goes out to lunch with Catherine Keener, who either was
Catherine O'Hara, right?
Oh, Catherine O'Hara, yeah. Who was either, I believe she also worked at the paper, and then she had a child, and that's when we see Marissa Tomei come into Michael Keaton's office, and she's like, I have seen my future, and it's a woman who guzzles down a bottle of wine at lunch in a single gulp.
Yeah, and it's a very bored housewife that's not fulfilled, sounds like. Yeah.
Right. And like that kind of scares her, and that's why she's like, look, I'll go find out this information for you. So like even she doesn't really want to slow down.
Yeah, and he doesn't seem to mind that much, because like whenever she's going on and on about her sources and stuff, he's like basically like, this is so hot. Yep. you're so smart. I love how smart you are. So they kind of balance out the, like, I think the tropes and stuff with her pretty well.
They do, because in a lesser movie, when he gets to the office in the morning, not when he gets to the office first thing, but like when he goes off and does something, when he comes back, his secretary's like, hey, your wife called, and he calls her back, and he's just like, hey, did you need something? Well, not right now, but like when I get home, like, did you call me for some reason? And she's just like, what's happening at the office? Tell me everything.
I know, she's bored.
Right.
like, tell me everything.
And then he's like, all right, the phone's slipping out of my hand. And then like he hangs it up and she's like, she's nuts. And I'm like, in a lesser movie, like that could be bad, but the way it's done, it's funny because she, she's went from this life as a reporter, chasing stories, to just like home watching TV.
Yeah, waiting.
Yeah,
Yeah, she's like not having fun.
Right.
Yeah, and,
it's not even
plus,
like
she's.
It's not even like she's like taking care of the child at this point. She's just
Right.
like sitting there waiting for the child to be born.
Yeah, it's an action-packed 24 hours for sure. There's
Like-
a fight at the bar, there's a birth, there's
Yeah.
a murder, like so much stuff.
Murder, gunshots, everything.
Mm-hmm.
But so I would really love to have seen a sequel to this to find out like where these people are at now.
Yeah, because you're kind of left. You don't really know at the end of the movie.
Right. You kind of assume everything's fine. He has a healthy baby boy.
Mhm.
Glenn Close realized what she was putting a dollar sign on people's lives, but like what happens after that?
Yeah, we don't know.
You
We just got a quick look, like a quick slice of life, 24 hours. That's all we got.
Yeah. It is a very fast 24 hours. Like, I don't know how these people are not. This is why all you see Michael Keaton drink throughout the entire movie is Coke, from the time he wakes up to nighttime.
Yes, that's true. They must have had to deal with Coke.
Another one of my favorite scenes is, so Michael Keaton is always asking for change because he's always trying to get cans of Coke. But you have Clint Howard, who plays a reporter, who's like the reporter trope of the reporter who doesn't have the best grasp of the English language to an extent. So like whenever we see Clint Howard, he's always like, hey, does anybody have another word for this? Or what's a word, for this? And so Michael Keaton is asking him for change, and he's like, hey, do you have another word for it? He's like, hey, I got another word for all of them. And he just like throws him off to the side and he starts typing up the story for him. But I do like how that kind of trope of the reporter not having like the biggest vocabulary.
Yeah. It's funny.
Yeah. No, it really is.
Oh man, I just had a question and it left my brain. Hopefully it comes back to me.
Did you have a favorite scene?
I think all the stuff that happened at the bar that we already talked about is probably probably my favorite part. I think I just have a soft spot for Jason Alexander, so that may be why.
I don't know, like, so inside the newspaper building, the AC is broken. Now they're constantly working on it throughout the movie, and it's kind of a running joke where every time like you see the repair people, they're like, in a couple 2 hours you'll see your breath. They always like have a line. But when we get to the bar, like Jason Alexander is drenched. This movie does not take place on a rainy day, mind you.
But maybe it's in the middle of summer. I mean, like,
it's definitely in the middle of summer.
Summers are really brutal, so.
Yeah. But I think it also goes like to show like where his character is at like mentally and like what he's been going through. But I thought it was a really nice touch, for his character.
Oh, talk about the 2 bat signal things I missed.
So the 2 bat signal things, the first can of Coke that he has during the day, there's a bat symbol, there's a bat logo on there.
Oh.
Yep. And then when he's hanging up the phone, the camera pans down and there's a Batman logo on an ad for Six Flags Great Lake Adventure in New Jersey.
Interesting.
Yes.
Nice nods.
Yep. And then also, him and Marissa Tomei play a married couple. Were both in
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man: Homecoming.
True.
You have Dennis Quaid and Randy Quaid. Robert Duvall and Randy Quaid, who were both in Days of Thunder together,
Mm-hmm.
which was not Ron Howard. It's not, but it's also a really good movie.
Nice.
Yeah. So a lot of the cast, have worked together in the past. And
Yeah.
again, you have his secretary who led the search for Carmen Sandiego.
I loved that show.
It's such a good show. Like, it was one of the best PBS game shows.
Yeah, it really was. Well, was there anything else from the movie that we missed?
I don't think so.
I feel like we covered it so quick. It was,
I mean,
we got the highlights.
We did, and we left out enough that even though, look, yeah, everything kind of turns out all right in the end, but that's true for most movies. I don't think it doesn't spoil the ability to watch this movie knowing how it turns out.
That's true. Like, we haven't really spoiled anything. I mean, it's still an interesting watch, for sure.
Yeah. You can also tell that this movie is of its time because there is so much smoking going on.
No kidding. And,
Everywhere.
Also lack of cell phones.
Yeah. There's only like you only see like 2 people with cell phones.
Yeah. There's a lot of using non-cell phones, regular phones.
Non-cell phones. You mean landlines?
Landlines. I was trying to think of the word. Thank you. I was like, the other phones. Beepers, as you mentioned earlier. Did you have a beeper back in the day?
No.
I
God,
did.
no. Did you?
Yes, my dad got me a beeper because, I have like helicopter parents, okay? So like,
before
sorry,
that was
Dad,
a thing?
Listening.
Huh? Before
yeah,
that was
it was
really
a thing. Like,
yeah.
Well, I don't know. Was it? My dad got me a beeper basically to keep tabs on me.
I mean, like, I could never really understand the need for like a normal person to have a beeper. Like,
I know, it wasn't a doctor or anything.
Yeah, like cell phones, I can always see like you could, like, people always make the argument like, should a child have a cell phone? Probably not, but at least it gives the child the ability to call the parents if something happens.
Right, because like, remember, they don't have ID. If they
Right.
get lost, it's yeah.
Right.
I mean, what I used
like-
it for was my dad would like drop me off at the mall, and then like when I was ready to leave, I would page him, and then go to a phone and call him, and vice versa. That's how we communicated.
So yeah, all right. I can, like, for something like that I could see, but like I was trying to think of it as like, well, as a parent, like, it would give you comfort to make sure your child had a way to, so you knew they were safe. But I'm like, a beeper doesn't really do that.
I know, he'd like page me at school sometimes too. It's like, Dad, I'm at school. Like, I'm still here. Where you drop me off.
What are you up to? I'm in science class.
Yeah. To be clear, most kids did not have a beeper. It was just me. But
and then you had all those like complicated numerical codes to figure out.
Oh yeah. Before texting was really a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you notice the lack of technology in this movie for sure. I don't
even think they have a beeper.
They talk about a beeper, about someone using a beeper, but you don't see anyone using one, probably because that's boring to see.
Right. Yes, that's right. The reporter for like the Manhattan district or whatever, or Brooklyn district, didn't answer his pager. They do mention that. But so yeah, there is definitely a lack of technology.
also the mentioning, like you said earlier, that's something that we kind of forget is like how much it costs to like make phone calls, either on landlines or cell phones, remained an issue for a couple decades, right? Until we're at where we're at now.
Yeah, yeah,
So
like the out-of-state
that's
phone
kind of an
call
of
thing.
its time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
long distance phone calls were a thing. Nowadays with cell phone plans, that's long since been that's stopped being a problem. Now I think the only problem is like country to country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even that's kind of gotten better with Wi-Fi, but yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I remember even like calling my parents collect sometimes too. They really hated that. If I didn't have any quarters on me, I'd
Right.
call them collect.
From a
They were
payphone.
like, "No." That's definitely an of its time thing for sure.
But see, if you were smart, when the collect call asked for your name, you would just put like the reason why you were calling, so that way they could
Oh
just hang
yeah,
up like,
like that
"Mom, Dad,
old
I'm ready to get
commercial.
picked up." Click.
Yeah, I think the commercial had something like I had a baby eats a boy or something like that. I remember that commercial. Anyway,
Yeah.
um, well, I guess then we're at the end, and so it's time for me to ask my couple of quick questions for you.
Yes.
Okay, so what is it about this movie that keeps you coming back?
The I am a sucker for standing up for like the truth
Yeah.
and like putting the truth above misinformation or anything else is really an admirable quality that I think is lacking somewhat today. But
Hmm.
I just love, the newspaper person fighting to make sure people are aware of what's going on and giving them like the actual story.
Hmm. Yeah, I kind of forgot to share this, but my degree was in PR with a lot of times when people get a PR degree, it's in marketing, but mine was in journalism. I learned through that experience that I was not going to be a journalist. They have a lot of my respect, but I remember one thing hearing over and over again was like the pay and the
Right.
long hours. And I was like, huh, that does not appeal to me, not making a lot of money working really long hours. Around the time when I got the degree, too, like things were rapidly evolving because of the internet. And so, it was a very shaky career then,
Right.
and obviously looks very different today. But I have a lot of respect, for people that are in pursuit of the truth. And I think journalism is very important. And so, kind of that's my personal reason why I liked that. What is a way that you would pitch this movie to someone that hasn't seen it before?
I would pitch this movie as a very like fast paced day in the life of a reporter,
Hmm.
or even just like ask somebody like, hey, did you like say the newsroom?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
I feel like a lot of that stuff was like really popular in those decades. So
yeah.
yeah, that's a
Like
good
if you
point.
like the newsroom, you would definitely like this movie because it preceded it, but it's very same
Yeah.
thing. The fast talking, or even like not necessarily who done it or mystery, but a drama that fights for the little guy.
Yeah. No, I like that. I totally agree.
Yeah,
Well, Palmer, thank you so much
not
for
a
coming
problem.
on. Yeah, I love
Thank you.
having you. You want to go ahead and plug your shows?
Yep, I am on Academy Rewind, which in theory releases every fortnight. Just don't hold us to that. But we do have a new episode coming out within the next couple of weeks, which will be our top ten movies of 2022 with you on as normal.
Yep. I'm very excited about that.
Did you finish your
I
list yet? Is the
there's a lot of like I haven't even seen Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is insane and the reason why is because it's hard to find it streaming. Like
look,
you're just like buy it, spend $12.99, which I'm like maybe I'm just gonna do that because I'm just tired of waiting.
look, I'm going to let you in on a secret. I went through and organized my list over the weekend. Why I
Okay.
waited till then to start, putting stuff in order is something I will never do again. But before every episode that we do of those, I go through and write down what I think will be on your list and what I think will be on Tim's list as well, just to see how well I know you. And
I
look,
love that. I didn't know you did that.
I have
That's awesome.
I have written your movies down, and over the past 2 days, you have watched two movies that I had assumed you'd already watched. I had assumed you'd already watched Pinocchio. I assumed you already watched what was the one you watched last night?
Oh, see, I saw Pinocchio and oh man, what was the other one? Let me look at my Twitter.
Yeah, it was one that I was like, oh, she's definitely seen this, and I'm sure she's loved it. There was Pinocchio, because there was also another like highly rated.
Oh, The
movie.
Glass Onion.
Oh yes, so I'm like,
yeah, I loved it, but I did not get to see it in theater, sadly.
And then I also have Everything Everywhere All at Once on there. So I am really striking out on movies that I assumed you saw, apparently.
Well, I'm going to see it by the time we record, and you'll probably still be right.
Yeah. So
that.
Yep. Because we talk enough that I usually know what movies you've seen, and for some reason I had assumed you would have already watched these.
I know it's been a weird year. Like I haven't seen everything that I wanted to, but I will. That is a commitment. I'm speaking it into existence. Well, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I just pretty much have the menu left, which starts streaming tomorrow.
I'm jealous. I loved it. I loved it so much. I hope you like it.
I'm sure I will. I do really like the cast. So
yeah, the cast is really good. Yeah, I think you'll like it. Well, thank you again, Palmer, and obviously hope to have you back soon.
Anytime. I have many movies that no one's ever heard of.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you for having me.